Hey Peyton, nice to see you on this beautiful day. And this time with a quote from Ray Dalio, where he says, asking others who are strong in areas where you are weak to help you is a great skill that you should develop no matter what, as it will help you develop guardrails that will prevent you from doing what you shouldn't be doing. What kind of ideas does that spark in your mind, Peyton?
You were the one that taught me of the phrase, the dumb tax. And I think that's a lot of what Ray Dalio is talking about. And this applies to a lot of dimensions in our life. And he's basically saying, look, if you assume that all you need to know is knowledge that you already have in hand, you will learn the hard way over and over and over that there's a lot that you don't know. And there's a lot that you don't know, which is the most dangerous part.
Mhm.
And what's true is that there's a lot of ways that we act, and we'll never have perfect information. We'll never have a perfect future universe simulator in which to run the actual math and see exactly how everything is going to play out. And given the limitations of our knowledge about the future, we actually have a perverse temptation a lot of the time, which is to cover up what is a sea of gray area with just a black and white narrative that we're attached to that's rooted in this underlying implicit assumption that we already know everything we need to know to make this decision, and to shove forward and try to impose our black and white thinking upon reality. And for complex decisions, this is how we get ourselves into a lot of trouble. This is how we take something that's a bad situation, and by acting in a blind fashion, we make it a worse situation, which sucks. This is something that I know from experience. I've done this many, many times. And the most important decisions oftentimes tend to be complex decisions where we can't know all the answers in advance. We can't run the math in advance and know exactly how everything's going to play out because the world's too complicated. And what's worse, the world that's already too complicated for us to figure out is also changing, and we're changing, and everybody around us is changing. And so, how are we supposed to make decisions? It's too hard. And we should not, given this context, limit ourselves to just the stuff that we already know. If we want to maximize the probability of not paying dumb tax, if we want to try to do less harm to our circumstances and make things better systematically to the extent that it's within our control, we should seek wisdom or knowledge or frameworks or mental models or advice from wherever the situation calls for us to get it. And the three core areas that I think it's helpful to consistently go to for advice, depending on what this specific situation is, once again, for important decisions, I would say one is mentors. And this is a lot of the times when we need wisdom that's beyond just knowledge. We need somebody's learned experience to borrow about this situation. The second would be peers, other people that do what we're doing and are currently working on the same problems as the thing that we're currently trying to do. And then AI is the third. And I would have said 5 years ago, books and blogs and Reddit and the internet and learning resources. Now I think AI, especially the good frontier models, they can really shortcut a lot of those and give us better, clearer, more bottom line insights. And we can arm them with a lot of the different contexts in different directions to help inform our decisions, especially to help point out a lot of our blind spots on the decisions. And all three of these, mentors, peers, I think are very useful for different circumstances, or a combination of them are useful for different types of decisions. And there's certain benefits and drawbacks of each of the three that I've found. And so certain questions, certain decisions, we're better off going and gravitating towards certain types of decision advisors and judgment augmentation resources. How do you think about, depending on our circumstance, if we want to make a better decision, how should we know what to go to help cultivate better judgment about what's going on? And when should we go toward any of these things to try to pay less dumb tax versus just make the call, go with what we already think, and push forward without overthinking it?
Question, Peyton. Thank you. The key to knowing where we should go to, in my opinion, is first awareness, second self awareness, because you need to know in which kind of realms you have a potential which is kind of higher than the potential of other people in terms of excelling in tasks related to that realm. So I believe that everybody is unique and everybody has unique qualities and characteristics and therefore also unique potential which can be applied to solving specific challenges, maybe business, maybe in relationships or any kind of challenge which needs special treatment to be solved. So, and if you know there's something unique about you, and there definitely is, then you need to discover what is unique about me, and then find it out through many experiments, and then kind of see in which cases these experiments lead to an outcome which is really good and unexpectedly good, and others will maybe celebrate you for the outcomes that you create. And if others already celebrate you for that and you feel you lose all track of time and you think of yourself, okay, that was really nice that I did that, then you have a good sense of where to go next, because you should follow where your curiosity flows in that regard. So building this kind of self-awareness to discover and reveal and develop your characteristics which uniquely suited for solving different challenges needs time and patience and many experiments and many iterations. So this is the first. You should cultivate a beginning again. Begin again to map out a new experiment which follows your curiosity. And you should begin again in asking yourself new questions that you never have asked yourself before, because only then you can discover new possibilities in finding, because you mentioned that the world is changing, everything is dynamic, we are changing, people around us are changing. So there's also a changing match of things which appears. So if you meet a woman and this is not the right time, the timing is wrong. Maybe she's in a different phase of her life. But if you meet her at the later stage in time, that may be the perfect match for you, because it is now a match, because the characteristics of the timelines changed in a way that it matches now. So what you need to look out for is these kind of matching situations, not only with people, but with your skills and with the levers that you find. For example, AI, like you mentioned. And you mentioned also that you would have recommended books and blogs 5 years ago. Now you recommend frontier models of AI. What I recommend in addition to that is like using frontier model tools like Notebook LM to leverage blogs and books to
Yes.
to develop insights from there. Uh, I find that really useful. Peers is a very important source of new possibilities as well, because you can exchange, learn, and iterate faster because you share your knowledge about what kind of experiments you tried out. You learn from each other's failures. So the more peers you have facing a similar challenge, the faster you probably learn, because of not only your iterations you go through, but also other iterations. And then when you found your strength, then asked yourself the unasked questions, then took yourself time to think about potential ways to go, then you go to mentors and ask for possibilities to map out the paths for the different opportunities which you found out. And the wisdom comes into play, because what you want to do with avoiding dumb tax is avoiding the higher order consequences which lead to more downsides than upsides. And that perspective can be given to you by other people with other strength. So this is why it's essential for yourself to develop the ability to ask other people with different kinds of strengths to make the whole picture that you see much richer. I refer to the phrase of, okay, don't tell yourself the black and white narratives, but start to ask for help and start enriching your perspective and see the world in color. So, Peyton, how would you approach the situation and see the world in color, and what would you cultivate for that?
What would you cultivate? Yes, I would say first and foremost, your point about self-awareness is the crux of much of this. There's a massive difference in how well we're able to navigate around the inevitable limitations of our own knowledge, experience, and wisdom if we are aware of that versus if we are not aware of that. In other words, the difference in the consequences that we will experience from what we know that we don't know is very limited, and we can look at it and we can work around it and we can acknowledge it and we can make a good plan and we can cover the downside versus what we don't know that we don't know.
Mhm.
This is what really wrecks you. This is where we really make things worse for ourselves when we're trying to make it better. Maybe we're so resistant to what we don't want in a situation that we react to it with blindness and then we make it much worse. Speaking from experience, I've done this many, many times. What you don't know that you don't know hurts. It hurts. And I think that this comes from a few things. One is this: if our identity is too rigid, it will cut us off from self-awareness. Identities are narratives that we have about ourselves that are in words. The map is not the territory. And so if we're too caught up in our story about ourselves or our image about ourselves, it will blind us to the limitations of our own capacities in a way that will lead us to act and make important decisions with not knowing what we don't know. And we will cause ourselves a lot of pain and consequences in these cases. Versus if our identity is transparent, if our self image is at least translucent, then we can actually see where are the limitations, where have we made mistakes before when we didn't know what we didn't know, and where might we flesh out our blind spots on this before we rush into a decision that would be hard or painful to reverse. And I think that when we look at the various sources, when you talk about cultivation, so self awareness, awareness, this is the most important meta skill of all of this, for sure. Everything else is secondary from this foundation. But moving on beyond that, I think that our mindset towards making decisions is another root issue here. Some of us, or sometimes all of us, will have two different ways of approaching something. One is as the advocate of our ideas, and the other is of the scientist that's looking to disprove our hypothesis. And these are
Mhm.
two completely different approaches to decision making. And I've employed both many times. And if I'm the advocate of my idea, if I'm basically behaving almost as if I'm an attorney that's litigating and trying to prove my point and trying to win an argument and trying to hold on to my ideas, then in reality, I don't have this idea. This idea has me. I am not free from this idea in my approach to it. I'm kind of trying to make this idea win. And a lot of times beneath the surface there, my ideas are a little bit intertwined with my identity. And that's what's causing me to be so attached to it. This is where we blind ourselves and we get ourselves into a lot of situations where we react not knowing what we don't know. Versus if I'm more of a scientist with my idea, then I have this idea. And rather than saying, what are all the reasons that this is right and how am I going to create rebuttals with narratives to all the things that might sort of attack my idea, now I'm actually trying to tear down this idea. What could be wrong about this idea? Why might I be making a mistake right now? What don't I know that I don't know? How can I find ways to try to throw attacks at this from various sources, from various directions, various angles? Pre-mortem, okay, if this goes wrong, what would have happened? What would I be not seeing right now? And then, of course, it's so easy to ask AI what I might be blind to about this that we're foolish not to at least get a sense check for a blind spot from that, which is one of AI's great skills is this breadth and completeness of knowledge and framework. So at least it can point out these are the 7 different things people would say about this, and then we can evaluate this for ourselves if we have the mindset of a scientist. The other sources, I think that when we take a step back and look at, okay, if I want to make a decision, how do I know what resource to go? We have books, we have mentors, we have peers, and we have AI, and if not AI, the internet and other resources. I would say that books are the ones for proactive. If we want to improve our toolkit in a systematic, methodical way for the future, then yes, books. But the issue with books is they're not really helpful for the decision we need to make this week. I don't need to go hire someone and I'm going to read a book about it before I act. It's not something that's practical to do reactively in response to what's right here at hand and needs acted on. So,
Um,
proactively, we should be continually consuming good books and the best books so that we can level up our mental models over time. But it doesn't help for the thing that's right here, right now. For what's here, right now, let's start with this mindset of a scientist trying to disprove our hypothesis. And then let's look at the question, what does this situation need in order to improve the quality of this decision? So mentors are great for wisdom, for pattern recognition. And so these are the things that are beneath the surface and they require intuition to come up with a good idea. So this could be a really difficult leadership situation or interpersonal situation or a really confusing situation that's hard to unwind or a big picture. I need to go down this path or this path. They're two completely different things. I have no idea how to compare them. And this problem is so complicated that it resists a pros and cons list. That's what mentors are really uniquely great for. And with mentors, they're not all equal. And so the discernment of who is wise and who is successful but not wise is essential for us to parse through, which requires awareness. Moving on to peers, what are they useful for? Peers are very useful for expertise and solutions. And so if I am struggling with some specific result in my business, so for example, this year I had an issue where of the people that inquired and wanted to get a quote from us and filled out a contact form, a very small percentage of those we were actually going out to meet with and give a quote to. This is a complex problem, a difficult problem, requires expertise, somebody that is currently solving this problem well. For that type of a problem, I need to go to a peer and a peer that's doing this at a higher level than I am. And so I have a good friend who runs a company similar to mine, and he's smarter and better at it. And so he's the person I go to when I need expertise. And hey, I'm struggling with this thing. How do you solve it? Have a good solution that you're deploying at a high level. That's who you need to go to. If you have a problem that you need a specific solution to, that's hard to solve and you're not succeeding at solving it and you don't know why you're struggling to solve this thing. The third source for a problem that's at hand is AI. And this is where I'd say it's obviously much lower friction, so we can use it for many more things where I'm not going to hit up my mentor 6 times a week about these everyday things that pop up. And so the threshold is lower when you can consult AI. I would say AI is also great compared to mentors and peers in the sense that it's much less biased, at least as long as we're careful to prompt it not to parrot back our own preconceived ideas and we kind of try to eliminate our own bias intentionally in prompting it. I would say AI is good because it doesn't have some pet project or pet passion or pet opinion that it's overly identified with that causes noise in the system in the ways that sometimes you will have that with mentors and peers. AIs are good at breadth. They're good at, okay, these are the 10 things that people that broadly, if you asked 100 people about this, these are the 10 themes they would bring up. And so it's good at this brainstorming completeness and blind spot checking. I would say it's really effective at this type of a thing, as well as giving you a bunch of ideas that then you can apply your own intuition toward to select the best paths and then feel out what are the pros and cons of this, I might not be thinking about this. And so, and you can use it way more often. And whenever you're talking to a mentor and a peer, you can use AI to clarify what you're bringing to them and to refine your understanding of the problem before you approach peers and mentors. It makes those situations much more effective if you use it for that. So, all this to say, when you think about the scientific method of solving our most difficult problems, trying to avoid paying a lot of painful thumbtacks because of what we don't know that we don't know, and then surveying these different avenues that apply to different sorts of situations, what would you say is the practical takeaway philosophy approach as we run into situations and we want to behave more wisely and get in our own way less and cause our problems to be worse less? How would you zoom out on this and say these are the principles that Ray Dalio is pointing to in this quote, or that we should keep in mind as we navigate things and need to know what to apply to what?
Big question. How would I zoom out and detach? I would be first realizing that it's all in our head first. And meditation brings you the clarity
Mm.
of all these agitation about challenges I have and seemingly unsolvable problems I have in relationships or in practical expertise and so on that I don't have. All these problems appear bigger if we are fully immersed. First, we have to take a step back so that our ego, our identification with a certain kind of structure does not stand in our way of approaching a solution which is meaningful. So, first, meditate and detach, and then you see there are many, many more paths than just the narrow one that you wanted to pursue reactively upon receiving a bad news item or whatever. Then realizing your ego and your blind spots are maybe your biggest barriers. So, like you said, try to seek help, but be aware that you will always have blind spots. Seek help from others to fill out these blind spots and prepare with AI and prompt it to be less biased. That's possible, yeah. Though it has structurally some biases that need to be resolved as well. So, but you have the possibility to pull the lever into a certain kind of direction. So you can prompt it so that the output and the iterations you do with it are more useful. And if you overcome your barriers like that through asking other people in areas where they are strong and through detaching, probably you need to do it like fireworkers. You need to first see the thing transparently, gain insights with people who already are in the trenches, and then plan adaptions and actions and pursue them until you need to make the next step transparent. What are the outcome of your actions? You need to make it transparent again and cycle through that complexity in a very systematic way so that you won't identify with your preacher mode or your advocate mode, but with your scientist mode to really discover what is true in the world that you are living in right now in this situation so that you can discover how the world works. And if you are close to how the world works, then you will see it because of your actions, they have results which are beneficial because your theory kind of maps with that. And what I would want to add is that if you removed your ego barrier and your blind spot barrier, which is always a dynamic process because things are changing, then you can ask yourself, okay, how can I be much more effective? And it's easier to be 10 times more effective, it's a saying, than to double your effectivity due to the simple process of finding out the characteristics which you display, which you are uniquely good at, and then just focusing on these ones if you are in a structure which allows that, obviously. But as an entrepreneur, as you are one, you can also think about this idea of, okay, how could I make my people X more productive instead of only 2X? Because it's simpler to craft the role and the description for the role according to the needs of the role, and then find the people who display these kind of strengths which are unique to this role, and then fit them right into and say, okay, you are not allowed to do anything else. So this is also what is referring back to Ray Dalio's principle that it will help you to develop guardrails that will prevent you from doing what you shouldn't be doing, because it's about making your strength productive, not covering your weaknesses. And if you make your strength productive, I believe, then you can give the world much more of your gift that only you can give to the world. What do you think about this approach of X versus 2X and making your strength productive? And in what kind of combination do skill sets really turn into strength?
Great question. When I think about 10x easier than 2x, I do come back to this, the power of flow, the power of alignment, the power of this creativity that is much less effortful and much less struggle than when we are kind of in some form of inner conflict and struggle mode against whatever we're working on. You did mention that this recommendation for meditation in the context of this, and I totally agree that upstream of our capacity to make wise decisions and to use any of these principles we've talked about, upstream of our ability to recognize that there might be blind spots that we have, and then to actively go seek out ways to find them out. The mentality of being a scientist rather than a preacher. All of these things do require awareness, and our ability to cultivate awareness is core, and practicing meditation or whatever helps effectively with cultivating awareness is essential to take seriously. It's not something that seems to happen on its own for me or for many people, and it is worth investing time in. And I think that there's a bit of a culture that it's worth investing time in physical training, but not many people recognize how it's worth investing time in prioritizing mental training and cultivating a clear mind. And so much of our consequences are upstream of our capacity for clarity. And if we have a chaotic mind, we oftentimes may even know that we should go talk to a XYZ person or XYZ resource about the XYZ type of a situation, but we're unable to apply the things that we technically know if we don't have the dynamic state of some level of awareness. It causes us to get caught up into defensiveness and into advocate mode. The last thing I'll say as it relates to all this, which is something that I'm continually trying to remind myself of, is when we're trying to have good judgment, when we're trying to make good decisions, when we're trying to make things better for ourselves and not accidentally make things worse for ourselves, what is essential is our skill at defining the problem. If we are not skillful at defining the problem, then we could go a long way trying to solve the problem or applying various resources to solve the problem. But if we've improperly defined the problem, then we could go through a good decision making process and arrive at the wrong places because we're solving for the wrong thing. And so the habit with this that I think is important, one is define the root issue. So if we're talking about, oh, this system isn't working, this project isn't working, we need to do whatever, we need to invest this so that this thing is unbroken, we might say, whoa, 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 let's step back. What's the root issue? Well, the root issue is that customer satisfaction is lower. Like, okay, well, is fixing this system the best way to solve the root issue? Or is there an easy way that we can solve that issue and we might not even need the system and we can get this a better result because the system isn't the right solution to the problem, the ultimate problem. But you can only arrive to that way, this easy path, if you step back and you don't narrowly define the problem based off of the path that you're already on and your fixed frameworks, but you can zoom out and look at what's the root issue. The other aspect of defining the problem that's of unbelievable importance and yet is so hard to remember sometimes is you don't want to define the hard problems by what you don't want. You want to define the hard and important problems by what you do want. It's two totally different things. Before we got on the call, you mentioned the analogy of when you're driving and looking at the wall that you don't want to run into, you accidentally gravitate toward it. The same thing is kind of true in our lives. When we're caught up in our situations and framing all of that's going on based off of what we don't want, it actually doesn't work well. Like, this is an empirical claim I'm making based off of many of my own mistakes. And a lot of times when I frame problems negatively in terms of what I don't want, what I'm resisting, versus positively in what I do want and what I would like to cultivate and where I'd like to gravitate toward. When we focus on what we do want and we focus on the root of what we do want, how do I want to feel? How do I want to exist? How do I want to be? How do I want to flow? How do I want to create? These what we do want, or if it's a business, how do I want the business to go? What is the business result that I want? And then let's work backwards from what we do want rather than getting so fixated and narrowed in on what we don't want. Makes an unbelievable difference in the decisions we're able to make. And it also is core in this X rather than 2X thing. If we're focused on if we're focused on the problems, it narrows us and confines us. If we're focused on what we're trying to create in the vision, then solutions can appear and creativity can emerge that we were not expecting in advance, which is the nature of creativity, is that things emerge that you didn't already know were there. And so this defining the problem on focusing on the vision, focusing on what we are aiming for, it's surprisingly easy to forget this. It's surprisingly easy to get reframed on the negatives and what we don't want. And it's fundamental. It's foundational, this difference of defining the problem well versus not. And so, with that in mind, my intention this week is to get much better at that piece. I can personally say, even in the last week, I've gotten really fixated on some ways that I don't want certain things to be, some things that I'm resisting, the negative elements of the problems that I'm working on, and defining the problem with that framework narrowly, and not necessarily opening myself up to the greater possibilities and what I do want, and focusing on the outcome that I desire, the relationships that I desire, the end result of the business that I desire, the big picture, the vision that is there to go gravitate toward. This will unlock much greater possibilities than if I define the problem more narrowly and through a negative resistance lens. And so that's my core reframe that I'm trying to carry with me this week. What about you, my friend? What are your intentions for the week?
Great intentions, Peyton. My intentions for this week is to make my strength more productive, due to that I now discovered more and more what brings me flow, that I now discovered more and more what kind of vision of a life I want to lead is there, and then making my strength more productive to give the world the gift that I can and give. This is my intention for this week.
Beautiful thing, man. Beautiful thing. Well, enjoyed this conversation a lot. Really appreciate you sharing your thoughts. I will see you on the
Likewise.
next one.
See you soon, Peyton. See you soon.
Yep. Take care, brother.
Take care.